Watching movies kind of growing up, there was always a very soft film-like look, and you hear this look, the film look. What is that? Sure, they might be speaking to the grain, but I think beyond that, they're speaking to like the soft, sort of reminiscent quality that film has when you sort of watch movies from the 90s, 80s, and earlier. There is a certain look that's built into film that's so beautiful and so cinematic. So as we sort of advance our technology, a way to kind of get back to that look is by using filters, because there are filters that achieve very similar things that film used to be able to do, which is a lifted black point, lifted shadows, sort of highlights that are sort of soft and bloomy. So yeah, I think filters are really kind of getting the control back as a cinematographer. Your job is to really set the look, right? So I think filters are just in your wheelhouse of tools that you should be using to sort of not only make your images stand apart as a cinematographer, but to kind of get back to what initially drew us to cinematography in the first place. I grew up watching Jurassic Park and Back to the Future, and if you go back and watch these movies, they still have a very cinematic place in history. They look so rich, they look so beautiful and soft, and I think if you advance forward with these cameras and these really, really sharp lenses, I think they can sometimes be a little too sharp. First up are softening filters. So what do softening filters do? Well, like you might have guessed, they actually do soften your image, but more specifically, they soften your highlights. This term is called halation, which is essentially the level in which your highlights are blooming. And another effect softening filters have is they lift your contrast. So your shadows, the darker parts of your footage will feel lifted. This combination of bloomed highlights and lifted shadows is a great way to make your modern, razor crisp, 4K digital footage have a softer, more cinematic look. Softening filters range from Pro Mist, Hollywood Blackmagic, Locon, Glimmerglass. There are so many of these. We're only going to really touch on the ones that we've personally used on our shoots, but feel free to experiment. There are so many beyond the one we're going to mention in this course that will definitely give you different effects, and maybe some are a bit stronger, some are a little bit more subtle. But at the end of the day, the one thing you do want to take away are the strengths. Most of these softening filters they range from 1/8 to a 2, or maybe a bit beyond a 2. So 1/8, 1/4, 1/2, 1, 2. As you get larger on that spectrum, 1/8 being the most subtle and the weakest strength, and a 2 being the most intense, dialed to the max strength. That spectrum is kind of up for you to decide based on your project, the creative, or the effect you're going for. You might land somewhere on that spectrum. A good rule of thumb too for softening filters is to remember to walk off the strengths the more you zoom in. For instance, say you put a half and you're shooting on a 25mm. So you're on a 25mm and you have a half Pro Mist. And then you switch to a 200mm. Well, if you leave that same half in, the effect is going to be a lot more extreme. And that's just because you're looking through a narrow part of that glass because you've zoomed in. So a good rule of thumb is as you crash in, so say that 25, you're on a half. If you went into that 200mm, you'd want to maybe step off to either a 1/4, an 1/8, or none. Because if you left that half in, like I mentioned, it's just going to be so extreme. So, good rule of thumb is you zoom in, lighten the strengths, and as you zoom out, maybe hike the strengths back. There are different kinds of filters too. There are color filters, and color filters, when put in front of a lens, will actually give an effect. From coral, antique suede, tobacco, sunset grads, all of these will alter the color of light coming through the lens. I love these filters, and I would even argue that some of the color created by these unique filters I've never been able to reproduce in post. I think, for instance, antique suede, if you're trying to go for like a warm, summery kind of vibe, I have done tests where I've shot with an antique suede, then pulled it and tried to color it to match what that filter is able to give me. And I'm not like a company 3 colors, but I do think that antique suede gave a truly unique image an effect that I was not able to recreate. Even in this modern era with technology, I think these filters still hold a light to a lot of these things you can do in post. So yeah, these filters did stem from, the need in film where you couldn't adjust the white balance. You were either at tungsten or you were at daylight. So you added color filters to get these kind of in-betweens. But I do think that when you apply them to the digital era, you can get some really unique effects. So I do challenge you on your next shoot to maybe play around with a few, my favorite being antique suede. But yeah, there are tons of color filters you can do that will definitely give you really unique looks on set. Next up are effects filters. Effects filters will alter your image to create a certain effect. These are by no means filters you would use on every single shot, but when it comes to music videos or commercials, when you want to get a stylized look for a certain shot, these are great things to keep in your kit. Our favorite effects filters come from a company called Prism Lens Effects. They specialize in effects filters. They make a star filter, which will turn your highlights into a 4-point star. And there's another one they make too, which is the blue streak filter, which essentially mimics the look of a Panavision anamorphic blue flare. And perhaps one of my favorites is their kaleidoscope effects filter, which basically gives a kaleidoscope-like effect, sort of abstracting and multiplying your subject. Each project is different and may call for a different look, but I'm a huge fan of getting the look in camera because, a lot of these effects are impossible to recreate in post, just given how they manipulate and alter the image. The last kind of filter, and the more kind of commonly used one, is an ND. ND basically takes the stop off of light. More often than not, we want to be shooting on the faster end of our lenses to get more shallow depth of field. But if you're outside in the desert, or maybe it's a sunny day, you'll need to take down that light so you can be at like a 2.8 or a 4. So an ND acts almost like a glass version of a scrim, taking down the light. Each increment of 0.3 is a stop. So if you have an ND3, that's 1 stop, ND9, 3 stops, ND12, 4 stops, etc. All these filters mentioned above can come in either a screw-on version, which basically depends on your lens size, like 77mm, or a 4x5 version. And the 4x5 version just goes into a tray and gets slipped into a matte box. So to recap, filters are a way to create a look in camera. Instead of leaving it up to a colorist to give your footage a feeling, it gives you the power back as a cinematographer to be bold and to set a look. I often feel that other departments on set love when they can see an image on the monitor that's closer to the final output, opposed to, oh, don't worry, we'll fix it in post. So on your next shoot, try to switch it up with some color filters or softening filters, because honestly, when you use them, you'll never want to go back.